main topic here on Mastering Dungeons, we wanted to do a little bit of a look at this new era of RPGs that we're getting into with let's call it the era of the RPG revolution, because D&D has, since its inception, sort of been the tabletop role-playing game that was at the forefront of everyone's mind when you talked about tabletop role-playing game. It never quite got to the point where it became the substitution for tabletop role-playing game, like some brands like Kleenex had
Right.
become.
Right.
But
Xerox.
it was always the thing that was the exemplar for that
Yeah.
categorization. And we're always asking, will this be the game that knocks D&D from that perch? Will this be the thing that begins to rival sales and headspace and marketing space and just the overall social zeitgeist of what D&D has been? And as 2025 is halfway through, we have seen the Cosmere RPG becoming the largest crowdfunding project ever for RPGs with 55,000 backers and $15 million. At Gen Con, we saw Critical Role and Darrington Press make this massive surge for Daggerheart. As we said in the previous segment, 500,000 characters created on Demiplane, and the books are selling out globally. Draw Steel raised almost $5 million in 2024 and now is out in PDF and soon will be out in print. We have
Yeah.
smaller games like Shadow Dark, which did not mean to or did not attempt to rival that, getting 1.3 million in 2023 and then a follow-up campaign doubling that as player excitement in that game continues to grow. Obviously, if you're in the RPG space, you see and hear of more and more people playing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
we hear about the Shadow Dark needing to be reprinted multiple times.
right.
So yeah, and it's a small game, right? It's not a major company making this release.
Yep. So, we're all used to D&D being dominant. Is that going to change? Is there a new era of competitive RPG revolutions coming for D&D? All right, Teos, let's start to break this down. Let's look at the history. Let's look at the history of RPGs to set a baseline, if you will, for what we've seen so we can figure out where we're going.
Yeah, I mean, I think this question has been asked all the time. Um, and there have been years where if you were focused on the industry at that time or, alive, you might have thought, well, I can tell you where this industry is going and D&D, bye-bye. Sorry, it's 1975, Shawn. Tunnels and Trolls is out. They have created a more
Yeah.
accessible version of OD&D. That OD&D game is impenetrable. Nobody's going to play that. Tunnels and
Mhm.
Trolls is here to stay. We're done. Or it's 1978 and RuneQuest has come out, right? When I was playing the hobby in the 80s, Shadowrun, Traveler, Call of Cthulhu, they all had years where the market was really seemed to maybe indicate this game might prove dominant. In the late 2E era, there were, we would be at conventions and we'd look around at all the people playing Vampire the Masquerade, walking around in the goth army that would walk around a convention. We'd think, wait, are we on the way out?
Yeah. Yeah. And with third edition, we saw the switch from third to fourth bring Paizo's Pathfinder to the fore,
Mhm.
where it came very close in a couple of years to outselling Dungeons and Dragons. And for me, that's a little different because it was essentially a D&D edition versus another D&D edition based on
Sure.
taking one
Would
very
you like to
stable rule set,
like to
updating it.
play D
But
and D or
still,
D&D? But yeah, but still,
yeah,
because
but
the company
yeah,
controlling it was very different, right? And a different
for
size. It
sure.
was definitely had that
Yep.
David and Goliath aspect to it.
Yep. So what does D&D have on its side that makes it very, very hard to topple in terms of the reach of these other games that they're trying to
Yeah.
attain?
I think back in 75 and 78, this Tunnels and Trolls type thing, D&D had almost no footprint, right? It was a game like any other game being sold out of people's basements and so on. And so maybe it could have happened then, right? Quite easily by
Mhm.
just the simple virtue of saying, well, more people are playing Tunnels and Trolls. We're done here. That could have happened, right? Or if Shadowrun had somehow maybe had slightly better rules and everybody would have really played that more, and that might have become what was in everybody's mind. But a number of things happened with D&D to create a brand and market advantage that makes competition be much more than what a lot of people in the hobby might think, right? I think of a couple of years ago where, I don't know, maybe it was 5 years ago. I don't know how many years it was. Out of nowhere, people started saying that the Quest RPG was the thing and D&D was out, right?
Mhm.
Nobody remembers Quest RPG now. And I mean that as a slight. I'm just saying I don't hear about it anywhere, right?
Right.
Nobody's talking to me about their Quest RPG campaigns or anything like that. Not that doesn't mean it's not a great game, but this perceived threat was very different than the real threat. And why is that? Because D&D is just a completely different kind of game than most RPGs out there. Um,
Mhm.
it's recognized outside of our hobby, right?
Mhm.
It gets free marketing at a massive level in movies, TV, everything, right? There are pictures of box sets that appear in old movies like The Labyrinth. E.T.
Mhm.
not only depicted a version of D&D, but used, Steven Spielberg used D&D to decide which actors to pick. Stranger
Yeah.
Things recently, right? X-Files in the past, any number of moments. The Simpsons, anything, any number of
Mhm.
cases when D&D just is shown to be part of the fabric of our society, right? And a thing that people recognize and know. You say Dungeons and Dragons, random people on the street go, okay, yeah, I kind of know what you're talking about,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. And even when a different game might begin to emerge and maybe hit one of these points, it's never enough. It's got to be more than one, right? Harmon Quest. I remember
Mm,
Harmon Quest came out and people were like, he's playing Pathfinder, right? And oh, that's
yeah,
the end. That's the end. And it wasn't the end. It wasn't even the beginning of the beginning. It was just a one-time thing. Uh, so D&D has been to the mountaintop
yeah,
of movies. There have been several movies. Maybe one and a half of them were worth watching, but
yep,
there have been these movies. Uh, Critical Role, Acquisitions Incorporated, and Penny Arcade. All of these other companies and creators have, by using D&D as their basis for their popularity and the basis for their creativity, have, whether intentionally or otherwise, lifted D&D up into the stratosphere of the social consciousness.
right. Yeah, you might not know D&D, you might not own the books, but you watch Critical Role every week and you're part of that D&D brand that makes it popular. You're part of the people talking about it and pushing it forward, and maybe someday you will play it. Try it at a convention or pick up the starter set and off you go.
And with that push, D&D has been able to license out their brand beyond the role-playing game, which is why you see D&D cookbooks and Mad Libs and mugs and t-shirts and Converse shoes and so many pinball machines at
Yeah,
uh
branded lunch meats, Shawn,
yeah,
US
that's all you got to say.
stamps, right? Like
Yep.
just it's amazing. And think of the impact of all those people last year walking into a postal service and standing there. You're standing there bored in line and you look at what's there and a big giant poster of Dungeons and Dragons stamps.
Yep.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yep. And so that market advantage is huge. The brand advantage is huge. being able to put your game in Target as opposed to a bookstore or a hobby shop,
Yeah.
hugely important. But it goes beyond that because D&D is actually a really good game.
Yeah.
And in order for that uh, status to remain, you need people to be able to play the game.
Mhm.
And across the editions, D&D has always compared favorably to other games. It might not be your favorite game. You might have some nits to pick with the rules, but in terms of playability, in terms of someone being able to, with assistance, sit down and learn the game or read the book and get it themselves, D&D compares favorably to other TTRPGs.
Yeah. There are other games that have been, many editions across the years. They might have a great setting, Shadowrun, but the rules, they're hard, right? They're an impediment. They're a barrier to the enjoyment you want to have with the game. Or there are games that are really fun to play for a while. And then you're done. You're just not going to make this as great as this game might be, as much as you might enjoy it. It maybe works only in a particular genre, or it's a certain type of game, and after a certain length, you are done, and you go back to D&D typically, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that is uh, the fandom and the design together make it so when a new designer comes in, they can try their own path.
Mm-hmm.
They can say, I'm going to make my own game completely, or they can recognize the strengths of D&D and they can use it to enhance, expand, and illuminate their own ideas and their own sorts of uh, game design philosophies.
Yeah, and that third party part of it is a huge part of the community of the game. That engine of other creators, other companies, the ghost fires, right, that are making really neat ideas that you say, "Oh wow, look what they built with D&D. I have ideas. I would like to build like that too." And it creates just an entire culture. We saw this in 5th edition, right? Just the game comes out and people are thirsting to build for it. And when the SRD came out, I mean, the number of people that got involved creating things on the DM's Guild, on websites, on drive through, forming companies that were building one thing and then decided to build a 5e version, right? And it continues
Yep.
today, right? We see that with the announcement that Paizo is putting their 5e product on D&D Beyond, right? Like that continues to be there because there is a strong market call for that. But also, it's not, I mean, it's fun to design for 5e, right? Generally,
Mm-hmm.
it's a good time. And so it's not some laborious, difficult thing. And you probably know the rule set pretty reasonably well. And so it becomes a really easy thing with a decent payoff to it.
Yeah. And if you add on top of everything that we've talked about, the nostalgia of it, it is so, it can't be overstated enough. This power of nostalgia, this power of, I did this back in the day.
Mhm.
My friends and I loved it. It was so fulfilling.
Yeah.
I made my friends doing this. To separate that nostalgia from the game itself is almost impossible.
Yeah. And the notoriety too, right? We had this, we
Mhm.
talked with Tim Harford on this show about the
Right.
Satanic Panic, an episode he covered in his show Cautionary Tales. And that Satanic Panic was also a fabric of many people growing up in the 80s and even beyond, where parents would worry that their kids were going to get corrupted, which gave it awesome allure. Ooh, look, this is,
Mhm.
the Ozzy Osbourne of games, and made that exciting. And that was also part of that nostalgia, right? Like maybe you were sneaking to your friend's house to play the game that your parents prohibited you to play, right? And that can remain also as a part of it that you remember.
Yeah. So, and even those who didn't play it as youngsters, maybe because they couldn't
Mhm.
because of the Satanic Panic, or maybe they couldn't find the people to do it, but they had an interest, whether the interest was in the game side of things or the story side of things or whatever. The longer the game stays around, the more opportunity these people that didn't get the chance then will have the chance now.
And the new
And so,
classics, right? Like if
right,
you started with Tyranny of Dragons or any of these classic adventures for 5e, it has been 10 years, right? And so that
right,
is plenty. I mean, you might have been in high school and now you're in a very different stage of your life, but you have these fond memories of what you did with early fifth edition. And so even if you started what someone like us might say relatively recently, the truth is it's a lot of mileage, right? It's the way you and I felt in the mid 90s, maybe, right? Is how they feel now. And
right.
so that's true real nostalgia, right? Your life in high school or early college is very different than 10 years later.
Yeah. And to go along with sort of the marketing thing, in its current form, D&D is huge. So it has that advantage of scale where if Teos and I were making a game, we could print 100 copies. And maybe if we were lucky, right?
50
Wizards
for
of the
you, 50
Coast,
for me.
exactly. Wizards of the Coast slash Hasbro can make, hundreds of thousands of these books. And with that sort of print scale, they can make a larger profit than Teos and I would. Their per book costs would go down, their per book profit would go up. And so it's hard to compete if you're trying to compete with that scale of production.
Yeah, and this extends out to freelance artists wanting to work for you, right? Writers, editors, layout artists, all the folks that help make a book. There are an enormous number of people who want to work for D&D. For any other game, there may or may not be a rule set that they know well, and it may be there's a little more friction there in trying to decide to pay to be a part of that ecosystem. And your pay may be lower, right? A lot of RPGs don't pay the way D&D does, particularly when it comes to full time, right? D&D
Mhm.
has historically offered the best salaries and benefits outside of the TSR era, but maybe even in the TSR era, as bad as those salaries were. But recently, in say, fourth edition, third edition, fifth edition, D&D has offered benefits and salaries that are on par with the better video game companies and tech companies in Seattle. Um,
Yep.
and blowing away other similar, but other companies that are larger and more recognized, right? We've seen comparisons between, say, Paizo's salaries and Wizard salaries, not even close, right? And
Right.
the scale at which they operate, these print runs that are global, that involve multiple countries, multiple paths, right? Direct sales now on D&D Beyond, gaming stores, bookstores, larger box stores. Presumably, they'll get back to the Targets and Walmarts at some point. This creates all number of favorable deals that D&D enjoys. And the last thing here, Shawn, is they're part of Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, and that comes with some periodic significant detriments, layoffs, virtual
Yeah.
tabletop, executive
Yep.
changes, right? There are plenty of nightmares there. But it also means when you need a huge investment, you want to make a movie, you might want to make a virtual tabletop, you want to buy D&D Beyond, that
Mhm.
money can be done, right? D&D Beyond was purchased with cash on hand.
Right.
Right? I forget what it was, 125 million, something like that. Just yeah,
Yep.
let's just use some of the cash we have around.
Yep.
Most companies just can't make moves like that to leap into something else, right? To work on a TV show, to create a movie, to create some larger media extension. Hasbro can do that and isn't just able to do it, but is readily looking for the opportunity to do so, right? They've even recently reorganized to make that easier, right? To create more video games and more opportunities like this.
Yeah. So with all of that weighing on the side of D&D, we see these companies coming. We've talked about Cosmere, Drawsteel, Daggerheart, Shadow Dark, smaller games like that. Uh, what can they do to compete? What are some of the things that they bring to? Again, I hate that word, and I'll talk more about that later. But how can they exist in the same arena? How can they reach that stratosphere that D&D has reached? What
Yeah, I
are
mean,
what are the what do they have going for them that could get them at least closer?
And I think, the reason we're talking about this, Shawn, is we've seen some changes in our industry recently that suggest that there are more possibilities. Maybe it's a long shot, but it's a topic even worth discussing. Whereas I think you and I would not have done this show 5 years ago, right?
No, we
And
wouldn't have done this show 2 years ago.
yeah, 2 years ago. And
Right.
there are a couple of reasons for it. One is, like if I hold a book like Daggerheart up or Draw Steel or The One Ring here that just won these Ennies Awards, these books are beautiful, right? They are high quality paper, high quality art, excellent layout. The editor in Daggerheart and Draw Steel is an editor, one of the editors, Scott Fitzgerald Gray, who has edited the best D&D books, right? Your 2014 core books. And so a lot of there is a lot that a company do to make a product that is like a D&D product, arguably can be better, right? I've seen books from Ghostfire that I'm like, this is amazing. The look and feel of this book could not be better, right?
Mhm.
And so there is a lot that brings you close. And then the question is, what is possible with that? You can make a great game, you can make a great product. In the past, going back just those 2 years ago, what you were often doing as a different company, a non-D&D company, is carving out a space for yourself, for your game, for your community, in the shadow of D&D.
Yeah.
Right? If you're Shadowrun, you might aspire to be, as Shadowrun has often been, the number 2 game in our industry. And you're happy when you're 3 and 4. Because Call of Cthulhu is often number 2. So you might try to periodically bring down number 2 and get a 2 in there, but otherwise 3 or 4. And if you're Cyberpunk and you can get number 2 for a few years or 3, you're also super excited, right? These kinds of, you're hoping to do this because what it does is create enough revenue, enough presence that you can exist. And in some cases exist quite well. We see companies like Monte Cook Games who found an ecosystem-like way to thrive, right? The same way finches live on certain types of trees, and we've seen that with Darwin's studies. We can look at how Monte Cook Games has found a regular cadence of Kickstarters that allow it to pay really good salaries and benefits to a small number of staff and create good, exciting things in what feels like a pretty good and wholesome company, right? So there are these possibilities that you can carve out a niche. But what we're maybe seeing now, Shawn, is this question of could you go beyond niche to be a big name? And I think big name means both huge sales, community, and then the hardest thing is, can you extend beyond our hobby? And of course, last. Because it's one thing to do a trick for 5 years, 3 years. Can you do it for 10? Very few companies do that, and certainly not at a D&D level. I've spoken for a bit, so I'll shut up here.
Yeah, no, and certainly not on the RPG, in the RPG sphere, right? Because the RPG industry, the tabletop role-playing game industry, as we've said so many times, is so small compared to larger entertainment. So even if you do succeed, you're succeeding in a very small pond.
Yeah.
And D&D lives outside of that pond. They overwhelm that pond with the ocean of what they are. And so when we look at these other companies, the first thing I think of and the first thing I ask is, do they already exist outside of that pond? Do they, instead of growing in this small pond and crawling onto land to expand and to evolve, do they start outside of that pond and, like Wizards of the Coast, swim in the deeper, larger, cooler waters of revenue?
Yeah.
And in many of these cases, the answer is yes. So for Cosmere, Brandon Sanderson's fans gave him $41 million to write books. If we have $1 million Kickstarter, that is celebrated. That is considered amazing.
Yeah.
One very talented and prolific dude just said, "Hey fans, I want to write books. How much will you give me?" And they just shoveled $41 million to him.
Yeah.
So Cosmere is coming from a place where they are not in that small pond.
Yeah.
So they have a chance there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was, what was it, 14 million for the RPG Kickstarter.
Right.
So it's almost like the inverse 41, 14.
Yeah.
And so there, I guess it was 15 million, 15 million. So really close, right? But that shows the potential to reach out to that larger fan base. And if you can energize some of those, extending beyond the hobby,
Mhm.
and hook them, there
Right.
is a lot of potential there.
Yep. And Daggerheart, same thing, right? Although they played in the pond, the small pond, they had access to a much larger ocean with the voice acting from video games,
Yeah.
with the deals with Amazon Prime, with a whole different audience that was larger than just tabletop role-playing game fans.
Yeah.
And
Now
so now
I'm
we'll see if they
yeah.
can take advantage of that.
And I was pondering just last night what how Daggerheart is succeeding. Because an interesting thing about Critical Role is they created various D&D books. And
Mhm.
looking at the available sales data for them that's a few years old, those books did okay.
Mhm.
They did not do amazingly. And we have friends who said, "Oh, Critical Role has such an army of supporters, such a
Mhm.
reach that when this, Xandria book comes out, this is going to be the biggest D&D book ever." And it wasn't. And why
It
is
wasn't
that?
close.
It wasn't close. And it
Yeah.
seems that, Critical Role's audience didn't translate to buying the RPG book, at least for the D&D book.
Mhm. Yep.
Daggerheart has somehow managed to bring in a larger audience, but I'm not convinced that it's a Critical Role audience.
Mhm.
It may be an RPG audience where a lot of people said, "I know the Critical Role name. You've reached
Mhm.
me via your advertising because you have such such an extent of presence in our industry. So I'm aware of it. I'm curious. And as I'm hearing great reviews, well, I'll buy it." And it's selling out, gives it even more allure. And so I would guess, what do I know? Speculation. Critical Role or Daggerheart is being sold to our hobby. I'm not
Mhm.
sure it has extended beyond our hobby, even though they have an Amazon shows and the Critical Role
Yeah.
show and all of
Yeah.
that. I'm not sure that it's reaching out to that. Maybe it is, or maybe it is to a
Mhm.
small extent. I don't know. And there's that next question where that could really catapult beyond, and that's interesting.
Yep. Yep. So, we also have Draw Steel,
Mm-hmm.
who has this large devoted fan base, terrific
Yeah.
designers, an incredible personality with Matt Colville
Yeah.
at the helm of that company. Uh, so what can that do? Is that starting from the smaller pond,
Mm.
but is it going to have the momentum to get out of it and get larger?
Yeah.
That is a question that we'll have to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
And games like Shadow Dark uh, seem to have this counterculture appeal, which for me is both true but also hilarious. Because growing up playing D&D, RPGs are counterculture,
Mhm.
right? They always have been and they still are. So to be counterculture to the counterculture, I understand that
Yeah.
thing, right? It's like there's the establishment, we're anti-establishment,
Yeah. I
go
mean,
us.
it's rock and
Yeah,
roll, but then there's punk, right? Or there's thrash or
right,
whatever. And
right.
you will argue, well, Nirvana's first album was the best because that was the one when they, didn't have clean production. And then Nirvana says, actually really wanted clean production. We couldn't afford it. This is who we are. You know, fans will
Yeah.
argue. But yes, counterculture, because in fact, our industry is established enough that D&D
Mhm.
to people inside of it can feel like the pop music instead of the metal. Now, it obviously is all kinds of things, and
Right.
it isn't just that, but it can feel
Yeah.
that way. And or you can simply say, I want to return to the type of play I had before, right?
Yeah.
Or to a different kind of play. And so there is that appeal. And I think the question is, can a Shadow Dark create experiences that are so fun because of the kind of roots that they're going into, the type of gameplay they're tapping, that it becomes really popular in the way that D&D, was new and different and created that sank those hooks into you, right? Could it do it with enough people? And the other games like it as well, right? The other smaller games that are Shadow Dark just carries the banner for that kind of genre. But
Yeah.
if that kind of play could reach out into a larger area, there was a time when Magic the Gathering didn't exist, right? And its simple, relatively simple card-based play sank its teeth into people, and suddenly a revolution was there, and it upset our role-playing game industry for quite some time. So,
And I don't mean to imply that this is something that people should try for. Right? I don't want Shadow Dark to feel people to say it's a failure because they did not reach X, right? Nor should a company necessarily want to reach X. Sometimes doing the thing you do and doing it well and not traveling that path, but being successful and feeling like you've achieved your goals and have more goals that you achieve just within the bounds of that pond are absolutely fine.
That's an excellent point, Shawn. Yeah, nothing we're saying here should be interpreted as saying that is the measure of success of a company, right? Like, I think the Monte Cook games, what do I know? But from an outside observer, when I look at them, I love what they're doing. Because here's a company who's saying, we want to make awesome games, employ people and pay them really well, not overextend, and do our thing. And I love that. And it's creative, it's artistic, right? Love it. And a company that wants to do that, absolutely fantastic. I love it more. I mean, I'm very non-capitalist in my normal endeavors. And so if Daggerheart wanted to be, if Candela Obscura was more like what they wanted to do, cool. But it is interesting when you see Daggerheart be very much not Candela Obscura in terms of an approach. It's not just an esoteric game. And as much as it might have some artsy kind of funky aspects to it, how it is now being marketed is big level stuff, right? They are aiming high. Some of these companies may not want to do that, and that's totally cool. I'm absolutely down with that. But fans often wonder, right? Will D&D will be dethroned, and industry, anybody who's curious about the industry will wonder, can D&D really keep on going forever? And so that's where this all comes out.
Right. And there are different levels of quote unquote competition where we might evaluate one game versus D&D or one game versus each other. Obviously, one of the main is going to be sales, right? How many books are they selling? How prolific is the company? But there's also the community, right? How well does the community grow? And how well does the community comport itself in its interactions with each other and with other communities? Because that says a lot about a game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love Shadowrun, and I've often throughout the editions wanted to play, especially when a new edition has come out. And it can be hard to find players. And it's such a recognized name, and yet here I am yet again struggling to find a group to play Shadowrun, right? And that's tough when that happens, right? So that community angle matters. It matters so much to want to talk to somebody about the game and that they know what you're talking about. They're excited to talk about it, that your favorite people are making videos about it or blog posts that third-party creators you enjoy are creating for that game, right? RPG sales. What's interesting about D&D, right, is D&D is so big, and it is such a particular type of company that it's more of an entertainment company, that a company could outsell D&D for, let's say, a couple of years, and it would not matter. or need not matter, let's say. D&D might
Sure.
lose its stuff and overreact or whatever, but what I would, if I were asked, I'm not going to be, but if I were, I would say to Wizards of the Coast, don't worry about it. Focus on what you're doing, which is entertainment and your brand presence and so on. And if you lost some amount of market share to RPG sales, it wouldn't matter at all if you're doing all the other things you should be doing, because your dream is more like Disney with Marvel, right? And so you want these bigger things happening. Maybe the movie didn't quite go the way you want, but the video game, the Monopoly Go type stuff, like these are the things you say you want to be doing while also keeping this D&D engine humming. It's okay if every now and then some company were to threaten you and get similar or even larger RPG sales because of everything else that's going on. But those RPG sales are significant to the RPG company that does not have a Hasbro above it and cannot just launch a movie or a video game or any of these partnerships. And any partnership that might happen may be difficult to orchestrate in a way that truly is, long-term sustainable, helpful to its company or brand. So that's where those RPG sales are hugely important, or can be, for a non-D&D company, right? And it's a measuring stick of what's going on. It's the fuel that will allow you to create that community, right? The same way that Ghostfire creates these awesome products, they get enough backing. Now you can be at Gen Con creating these awesome experiences. It all adds up to where you can do more and have a larger footprint and better reach with your fans and doing the things that the fans want out of it.
Yeah. So is there anything else that we want to talk about just in terms of looking at other companies and what they might want to try, or how we might measure their success?
I think it's really tough. There has to be, can you reach a success level to where you can do non-RPG things? The way that D&D has Mad Libs, can you do that with a Critical Role product? Can you do that with a Draw Steel product? That's how do you get there? I sure don't know. But those are some marks of being in this larger space where you are communicating outside of our hobby and beyond our hobby, if that's what you want to do, right? If you want to be at start trying to get to that level, you need to do that. I think also the entertainment level, something that D&D often gets criticized for, is that for all that we might recognize Elminster and Drizzt Do'Urden, most people don't. They know the name D&D, but they don't know characters the way they know, say, Marvel characters. And you could say, well, not that many people knew Iron Man a while ago, but still, they have managed to do that. And so I think non-D&D companies want to think about that too. How do you get recognizable lore, stories, characters, which is maybe something Critical Role has done well, right? Through its shows, both live and animated, to create a little better understanding of what Exandria is and what the characters are, these various famous adventuring groups. Creating that kind of lore creates possibilities. Critical Role certainly makes a lot of money off of art books, novels. It extends that reach, and it means that your RPG team can be focused on one thing, and you have other people who are doing other work that extends how your company does, right? If you can manage that, which is a trick always, never easy, but if you can manage that in a profitable, good way, that can also help you be operating at a larger level.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot about Wizards at D&D as being this monolith that everyone is chasing or comparing to and evolving to become more like. But Wizards of the Coast and D&D itself is constantly evolving. It's constantly moving. And we got a little bit of that recently when Dan Ayoub, who's the senior vice president and the new head of Dungeons and Dragons franchise, put up a post on D&D Beyond talking about lessons learned and the direction of D&D going forward. What were some of the highlights of that article for you, Teos?
First was that it even existed, right? So Dan could have easily said, I'm the senior VP, Greg Bilson, you write something. I'm up here. But he didn't, right? He chose to get involved and write and share his passion as someone who used to play when he was 12 years old. And I think that came out nicely in that article as someone who wants to actually be involved and closer to the fan base. That speaks well for D&D's future, that he's not just like, look, I'm going to be messing with high level stuff. Don't bother me.
Mm.
He wants to be down here talking to fans. So that's the first thing that stuck out to me. The next piece was that the intent of this was not just to say, hi, I'm here, I care about D&D, here's my backstory. He wasn't just telling us about his character, Shawn. He was saying, I see where we've been, and I think I hear that you want some things to evolve. So here's what we're beginning to do, and more will be coming. That as an approach, away from the details, right? Just as a general approach, is really good. Really good news, and speaks to what you're saying, the always evolving bit. This was somebody saying, we're evolving based on what we're hearing from you. That's a huge win right there.
Yeah. One of the things that Dan talked about in this was the hope that the 2024 rules enhance 5e, not completely replace everything. And that's been an interesting discussion that I've heard in person, online, um, thrown at me, thrown around me. Is this an update? Is this a new game? Is this compatible? And the answer, and I think I've given this answer, is of course it is, and of course it's not, because everything is compatible in some way. If it's a role-playing game, it's a matter of degrees. It's a matter of how deep you want to dig down to define what compatible means or doesn't mean. So just expressing that desire for people to see the books that have been published already as viable for play with newer material, I think goes beyond just a marketing thing.
Yeah.
And I think it shows a vision of what they want the game to be moving forward,
Yeah.
rather than seeing it as these strict and all-encompassing rules, to see them as guidelines, to see them as tools that you can use to move forward with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great. I have a lot of thoughts on this subject. Some other day we'll talk about it. I think that actually, when I look at 5e 2024, it is in its writing more transformative of play than 3.5 was to 3e. That was an addition to which, even though it was really a 3.5, it it was a little more cubic, a little more miniatures based, but it was pretty much the same game with adjusted rules. It'll be interesting to see whether that is true of 2024, or whether its language, its emphasis, and the adventures that come from it will result in the game being played differently. I'm very curious. That's a thing I'm curious about. So I'm glad he's saying this, because I would want that statement. And I would be a little cautious about the extent to which the books change the wording, whether it really is enhancing 5e or replacing it, right? I think that's a good thing to be constantly looking at inside Team D&D.
For sure. And then Dan talked about the rolling SRD. So the SRD will continue to be updated on a rolling basis to stay up to date with any errata that is put out.
Yeah, great, fantastic, love it. There was a little bit of time there when post OGL, they had made these promises, and then like time went on, we're all a little worried. And what we've heard since then has been very encouraging on the SRD. I think they are seeing how well D&D Beyond is doing with creators. They're seeing that telling people how to write for your game is helpful. I hope they'll keep doing that, because there is still a lot missing from the SRD as a creator. If you want to know how to write officially, nothing tells you how to write out the language of a skill check. You have to open the existing books and look at it. Nothing tells you exactly how to make that new monster format. You've got to dissect it or read my blog post, and so there is a lot here that could be improved beyond just errata or a new book being added.
Uh, D&D Beyond Maps will become free starting on September 16th, we learned. So you will no longer need a D&D Beyond subscription to use maps. As long as you're a member of D&D Beyond, you can use it to play, to host maps, period, straight up.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a subscription, a paid subscription, uh, some of the customizable options will require, like for
Yeah.
uploading your own maps, for custom tokens, et cetera, that will require a subscription or a paid subscription.
Yeah, and if I understand correctly, if you say owned Tyranny of Dragons, but had the free subscription level, you could not use maps to then see those maps, right? And
Right.
now you'll be able to see the maps for products you own, and whatever starter free maps will probably also be available to you as well. And you can upload yours, as you said. And then whatever you buy, of course, you will now be able to pull in there because maps as a general offering, as an engine, as a platform feature will exist for everybody, which is great. And it's just that kind of thing that also I could have seen Dan coming in and saying, I don't get involved at this level. And instead
Mhm.
must have had a meeting with the team to go, what kind of things are we doing to, how easy is it to adopt our various platforms? And someone probably said, well, you got to have a subscription to use maps. So even if you bought the product, you can't look at it. And Dan probably said, can we change that? And that's
Mhm.
sometimes changing staff is helpful in those ways, right?
Yeah.
Someone, well, could we just give it? Yeah, we could. Well, let's do that. All right. Here we go. And that's
Yep.
great. And I'm glad that he is operating at that level of detail, which is good.
Yep. Two more things, real brief. They have an advisory group announced that will consist of a rotating number of creators, publishers, educators, and fans that will advise the company on helping shape future tools, policies, and content. And then they will try to help spotlight third party creators who are building things for their game.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
both of these things that we talked about, instead of a new open gaming license or new license where people are paying, partnerships are always much better than holding a gun to someone and saying, "Give me money."
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I'm glad that they are finally coming around to see the wisdom of working together. And that sort of leads into my final thoughts here. Uh, we've said the word compete a few times, and I want Daggerheart and Draw Steel and Cosmere. Hell, I even want Shadow Dark to grow to the size of D&D in terms of their reach, in terms of the people who play, the community, the entertainment. That said, I also want D&D to grow to the size of the National Football League, right? Where there's a recognizable brand, there's a game in every home around the US and around the world where people could just sit down and play, where it could support every type of creator and every type of customer. I don't want there to be competition. I want us to, instead of people sitting down at night and watching Real Housewives of wherever the heck, I want them sitting down and playing D&D, because the competition here, I think, is between this wonderful hobby
Mm.
and the other things that people do,
Mm.
not versus these players within this hobby. And if we
Love
can
it.
all come together, and if we can all work together, learn from each other, help each other, lift each other up, we can have 100 million people playing RPGs regularly instead of just 10 million or whatever those numbers
Yeah.
are. And I think the world will be better off for that,
Mm.
rather than us yelling at each other about what particular game we enjoy or what particular style we enjoy.
Yeah. Amen. I love it. No notes. Yeah, Shawn, that's exactly it. It's this question of competition is fascinating from a historical perspective, from an industry perspective. But I agree absolutely. The ideal is lots of ways that people can come into this hobby. That would be a real dream. And there's no reason why D&D has to shrink in size because there are so many other people out there. one of the things our industry has often done is it's only cannibalized, fed off of the same player base rather than
Mhm.
extend the player base. And if it could
Yep.
do that, then everybody truly can have more paths to success. And there is enough there to point to it, right? That the things that make D&D resonate in media are universal things rather than game specific things.
Yep.
And there is that potential that it really could grow bigger in that way. It would be wonderful to see.
Yeah. To put a final point on it, Wizards of the Coast just today put out on their social media a picture of Justice Armand sitting at a gaming table at Gen Con this year
Yeah.
with Chris Perkins and Jeremy
Very
Crawford. And people, I mean, I thought, oh, isn't that great? They're talking and they're maybe interviewing them, and everyone in social, not everyone, so many people in social media were like, well, that didn't age well. Oh, you lost them. And I'm thinking it didn't age well. That was yesterday. That was yesterday because Wizards is not pushing them away and is not
yeah.
competing with them. They are saying, hey, come talk to us about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Let's sit down and play a game together. And if we can get rid of that mindset of,
Yeah.
well, they hate you now because they work for you and now they're gone, and say, oh, what are you working on? Oh, that's a great idea. Maybe we can partner. Maybe we can do this together. Is the direction we should be moving.
Yeah. And our industry is often created, I think, from a fan perspective, these versus situations, right? Paizo versus D&D. And then what's interesting is the number of Paizo people that didn't like D&D were like two, maybe three.
Mhm.
The vast majority of designers were hanging out in each other's games, knew each other, very much respected each other, which is why you see then Paizo people getting hired at Wizards and being just everybody's fine with it because they were already friends, right? And you see it as well, right? You work with a person who ends up working with Draw Steel, with Ghostfire, with any number of games. We have folks on our Discord who write for D&D Adventures League, then they write for Free League, then right, and because it's wonderful. It is wonderful
Mhm.
to be part of this. I would love to write for Cosmere if I had the time, right? I've had conversations about it. That's the kind of, and everybody feels, the vast majority of people in the industry
Mhm.
feel that way. And it would
Yeah.
be good to find a way to more clearly align fans with that.
Mhm.
There's always going to be that desire by fans to take down the number one D&D, but the more that we can lessen that and say,
Yeah.
the goal is more people playing
Right.
games, any kind of game, right?
Yeah. Agitation's great, right? There is power in strife, there's power in
Sure.
conflict, but there's also power in resolution.
Oh
There's
yeah,
also power in cooperation. And
stronger together.
speaking of stronger together and cooperation, that's the end of our show, but we cannot end without saying thank you to everyone out there listening. Thank you to our patrons. We have Master of Dungeon supporters out there on our Patreon. Uh, who we could not do this without you. We have Master of Realms supporters. Thank you so much. And you are in our show notes and in our hearts. And our Master of the Multiverse supporters, well, they are so dedicated that they allow me to mangle their name each and every week. So I am going to start with Agile Monk of Fantasy Companion Workshops, Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, Dave Bastiensen, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges Avalos. Calvin, thank you so much for your amazing marshaling this weekend. Brobo Ballin, Kevin Criswell, Dead Inertia DM, Evil John, Evanet Nimbleco, Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studio, who is the editor for The Stars now, apparently. William Harshman of Runeforge Tabletop Gaming, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Shawn Hurst, excuse me, Hyperlexic, the Jaunty Mantis TTRPG podcast, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, The Mighty Jerd, JL at Tileforge, JR of the Twilight Perspective, JT Evans, Brian King, Jim Klingler, Chad Lynch, Paul Mata, the Mathemagician, Jaron from Mathis Arcanum, Eric Mengi, or as we like to call him, the man under the great beast, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Mighty Zeus, Shawn Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson from the Deck of Player Safety, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo. Good to see you at Gen Con, sir. Philip and Lindsay, Frog Prince at Tentacle Squelching Wetly, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Ricardo, who might adventure, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Pruner from Croatia, Pugnus, Ozymandias Rex, Runner Rick, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simosa, Tim Smith, Spark from Dunner Games, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast. It was a pleasure being on your show. Talos the Stormlord, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Trace, Ryan Truk, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games. Great seeing you again, Jason. Javier Waziak, Waterford Wizard, Chris Webster, Zach Types, and Z. Walt Winfrey. Thank you so much for your support, every one of you. If you can't back us on our Patreon, no problem at all. We thank you for listening anyway. But if you get the chance, leave us a review wherever you listen to this show. It does help us spread the gospel of the dungeons and the mastering. And if you go on YouTube, you can like and subscribe and give us all the things. We are at youtube.com/@masteringdungeons. Teos, I know that you are still recovering from whatever alien manifestation has inhabited your system, but what have you been up to?
Yeah, I'm just trying to recover. I've been working on a design project, so all my energy's going there. So I have no blog posts, no videos, nothing. I hope I get better because I've got a lot of ideas, including wanting to write about this Daggerheart license and how to make most of it. So someday that'll come out. But until then, just go to alphastream.org, read the fun old stuff, which is, I think, quite useful. There's a good one that's tied into today's show on whether anyone can compete with D&D. Shawn, where do we find you on the social medias?
Well, speaking of fun old stuff, you can find me on the socials at Shawn Merwin, and you can follow the podcast on the socials at Mastering D&D. And again, that YouTube channel is there. You can see our, I'm going to say wonderful faces, but let's just go with faces. And so Teos, I've survived Gen Con. You will hopefully survive your trip and its many happy returns. So what are we going to do now?
Well, I think the only way to achieve peace is we have to take all the RPGs and mix them together into one giant mecha RPG.
I love that idea. I love that idea so much I'm not going to do it.
Dagger, Steel, Heart, Dark.
And Dragons.